A very controversial and contentious topic to kickstart the final hour of this show. No surprise there to regular viewers and listeners, but a new report into the Prevent anti-terrorism programme is expected to highlight how some groups funded by the schemes, they actually take money off the scheme, have in fact been promoting an extremist narrative. But it's not being released, just not now anyway, because of a cabinet row, allegedly between Suella Braverman and Michael Gove, although more likely between Home Office civil servants and Michael Gove. According to The Times, the Home Secretary is ready to publish the independent review and accept all its recommendations in full. But Michael Gove is supposedly not buying into claims that they should redact the names of some of the groups allegedly involved in basically taking money from Prevent, a counter-terror programme, and continuing to pump extremist views into mostly young people's minds. Supposedly the narrative is that it might turn them off, it might also make sure that they don't engage with Prevent going forward, and they might actually sue people in government. But is this just one big cover-up? I can introduce now social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Ehsan. Dr. Rakib, a lot of our viewers and listeners will be looking at this now and going, yet again, people don't want to offend certain sections of the Muslim community and potentially public safety is at risk as a result.
Well, I've said that all too often, Patrick, that our counter-extremism and counter-terrorism discussions are being increasingly paralysed by the forces of political correctness and identity politics. It's certainly not Islamophobic. It's not a form of anti-Muslim prejudice to point out the fact that the principal terror threat in modern-day Britain is presented by Islamist extremism. That is shown by recent figures regarding the MI5's wider terror-related watch list. Back in 2020, the figure was put in the region of 43,000. 39,000 of those individuals were Islamist extremists, so in the region of 90%. And it's also reflecting the prison population. The ideological composition of prisoners who have been found guilty of terror-related offences, once again, Patrick, predominantly made by Islamist extremists.
Dr. Rakib, we've heard police forces around the country say that one of the reasons they didn't want to get involved with the grooming gang scandal was because they didn't want to stoke racial tensions. Reading between the lines, this report is expected to criticise several organisations and highlight how some Prevent-funded groups have been actively promoting extremist narratives. I can't help but feel like here we go again. The truth would be deemed to be too much for the British public.
Well, I think that to my understanding, according to reports which were published today, the main problem here at the heart of government is that there are concerns at the Home Office over the naming of particular organisations and individuals, and the Home Office is fearful of legal action being taken against it. But I think that we certainly have to have a very serious debate about how Prevent-related funding works in Britain. Are all the organisations that receive Prevent funding, are they well and truly committed to cultivating anti-extremist narratives in order to fight extremist ideologies in our local communities? There's certainly a debate to be had on that front.
A source close to the author of this particular report says this: there is widespread unhappiness to the approach of the Home Office, saying we can't say this or that about organisations, redacting and removing certain bits. The author supposedly is frustrated and not buying the excuses. Potentially an implication here that Home Office civil servants are a bit too woke at the minute.
Well, I think that we've seen that Home Office civil servants have been problematic in terms of not being especially cooperative when it comes to the government's plans to shore up our national borders. I think that more generally there's also a debate to be had that within the broader Prevent structure, you do have local agencies, whether that may be social services, even agencies associated with healthcare, and schools as well, that there is a possible progressive left-leaning bias, and that's being reflected in the ideological composition of cases, which are then referred to Prevent. And it has been reported that one of the main criticisms of Prevent is that there's an overemphasis on extreme right-wing extremism. Now, of course, that we've had numerous sources say that the fastest growing terror threat is presented by far-right extremism, we can't lose sight of the fact that the prevailing terror threat is presented by Islamist extremism.
Yeah, and if people can point to the idea now that there is taxpayers' money being used to try to stop terrorism, and Islamist terrorism specifically, and some of those groups that money is going to is actually promoting Islamist extremism, and this is an independent report, and our government steps in and tries to redact that or silence that, Dr. Rakib, I can't help but wonder whether or not that would cause more far-right ideology in the UK.
Well, I think it would be problematic, because I think what you have there is that there'd be issues surrounding transparency and openness. I think we need to wait for this particular story to develop a bit more. I think in terms of reports which have been published on matters of counter-extremism and counter-terrorism, there has to be a degree of transparency. I do understand that the Home Office may well be fearful of litigious organisations that may well be named in the report, but equally, if it's seen as some sort of institutional cover-up at the heart of government, then that would be especially problematic, and it could reduce public confidence in the government in terms of getting to grips with extremism and terrorism more broadly in the UK.
Why do you think some people are more afraid of offending the Islamic community than they are of any other community?
I think that there's a degree of political correctness when it comes to issues surrounding sections of British Muslim communities. I'd really make this point as well, Patrick, that if people are fearful of talking about Islamist extremism, they're not doing anti-Islamist British Muslims any favours at all. There are British Muslims who may not face the more violent elements of Islamist extremism, but rather that sort of non-violent Islamist extremism, that victimisation and oppression that comes with that. They endure that on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's really important that we have these debates in a very open and honest manner, because ultimately it's not just doing the entire country a fundamental disservice, including British Muslims who are patriotic and are also fearful of the Islamist extremism threat.
Very finally, very quickly, would you urge them to just publish this report and hurry up with it and do it in full?
Well, I'm not going to necessarily comment on that. I think that the Home Office may well have its concerns surrounding the possibility of legal action being taken against it. But I would say this, that Home Office officials also have to be fearful that it doesn't look like an institutional cover-up on what is a very important report on the terror threat in modern-day Britain.
Dr. Rakib, thank you very much, as ever. Dr. Rakib Ehsan there, who is an expert in when it comes to extremism, etc., and anti-extremism and social policy as well.